Hello and welcome to week 8 of the Nevermoor Series Readalong. I'm Jess Townsend, the author of the Nevermoor books, and we are in our second week of reading Hollowpox, The Hunt for Morrigan Crow, which means we are in our second last week of the whole read-along, which means we are 1 week. 1 week. By the time you watch this, we are 1 week away from Silverborn being officially out in the world. What a scary and exciting feeling for me, at least. I am very excited for you to have this book at last. I'm excited for you to get those words into your eye holes or your ear holes, depending on how you prefer to consume the book. How did you go this week with chapters 13 to 25? Hello, it's me, Jess from the future. I'm just inserting a small PSA here to say that although you will most likely have read up to chapter 25 this week, the video will be going up to and including chapter 19, and then chapters 20 to 25 will be included in next week's round of videos. It's just kind of a time constraint issue. I explain more at the end, but I wanted to insert this little public service announcement from the get-go just so that you have a heads up and know what to expect. Okay, go back to past Jess. Okay, bye. It was a pretty decent chunk. You may be a little behind in the reading, and that's fine. You may be miles ahead of the rest of us in the reading, and that's also fine. These videos will be there for you to consume at your leisure. This is the second last week, and normally I would be announcing like the giveaway. As you know, if you've been following along, I'm doing a giveaway at the end of each of these 3 books. I would normally be announcing the giveaway like next week when we finish Hollowpox, but that will be the last video obviously of the read along, so I would like to announce the winner just to give you the full week to enter. This is a very long way of me saying at the end of this recap is when I will be announcing the next giveaway. So stay tuned for that. Yeah, I hope you've had a lovely week and enjoyed reading the chapters. I had a nice week. I turned 40. I'm going to ask Nat, who is the person editing these videos, to just edit in a little halo with a little ding sound. Little ding. I'll do it again. I turned 40. Good job, Nat. I'm excited to turn 40. It feels nice to me. I know that a lot of people aren't excited to turn 40, but I am thrilled. I was thrilled to turn 30. I was thrilled to be going from my 20s into my 30s. I'm even more thrilled to be going from my 30s into my 40s. I don't know. I think I'm meant to be an old person, and this just gets me one step closer to that. Okay, let's crack on. Let's recap chapter 13. Chapter 13, Wundersmith shock at Nevermoor Opera Horse. Terrible pun. Bad journalism. So we left things last week with the havoc that occurred on opening night of the Maledictions, which was Dame Chander's opera at the Nevermoor Opera House. The next day, Dame Chander is recovering, and everyone at the Hotel Deucalion is absolutely thrilled and delighted and honoured to be waiting on her hand and foot because she is, of course, universally adored. And she herself is just outraged and appalled that not only is there no review in any of the newspapers of her own performance in the Maledictions, let alone Javella de Flimsey's costumes, but also all of the coverage is entirely focused on whatever the horse one was doing, the madness that overtook the horse one, Victor Oldershaw. And she reads from an article whose headline is Wundersmith shock at Nevermoor Opera Horse in the Looking Glass newspaper. Basically, she's appalled that all of the newspapers have used this as an opportunity to frame Wundersmith as being badly behaved and threatening somehow, as they often want to do, as we know from what Jupiter told Morrigan on New Year's Eve, which is that the tabloids love a story about Wundersmith behaving badly. And Morrigan asks her why. Why do they not like Wundersmith? And Dame Chander says, "Darling, you know better than anyone. People hate what they are afraid of, and they are most afraid of what they don't understand. Wundersmiths are still something of an enigma, I suppose, and therefore some people see them as a threat, especially, though of course not exclusively, the older generations." And she goes on to say, Wundersmiths have always been part of the landscape for us youth, which Morrigan finds hilarious because Dame Chander is at least 20 years older than her, but us youth, okay, fine. It's easy for us to forget that Wundersmith rights are a fairly new thing, but it was only 8 or 9 years ago that it was legal to keep some Wundersmiths as pets. Now that's brand new information to Morrigan. She does not, having come from outside of the Free State, she does not have the same understanding of kind of where Wundersmiths sit in the social and political landscape, or how long they've been around, or where they came from, or anything like that. So she's quite shocked to hear this, and quite appalled as well. So Jack comes home and Morrigan tells him everything that happened while they are playing cards together, and Jack agrees with her that given all of these incidents that have been occurring, clearly they are connected somehow. There's something bigger going on. Jupiter and Fen have been away from the Deucalion all day, but Fen eventually returns without Jupiter. And of course, Jack and Morrigan immediately begin to pester her with questions about what happened when she chased the Horse One out of the Opera House. And she says, "I chased the menace for blocks. Nearly broke a leg trying to dodge all the chaos he left behind him. 2 traffic accidents, 3 smashed up shop fronts. Even when I finally cornered him down a dead-end alley, he tried to smash through the brick wall." Morrigan winced. She saw flashes of Brutalist Brown, the mindless, violent aggravation, as if he simply wanted to destroy something, destroy her. And she goes on to say that the Horse One also hurt himself really badly. He ran into the wall 4 times. He ran into my knife 10 times. He ran into the wall 4 times. It's like there was something inside him that just wanted to create havoc. Then he turned around and looked at me, and he just gave up, lay down on the ground. "If a Magnificat cornered me in a dark alley," said Jack, "I'd probably give up and lie down too." "No, it wasn't like that," Fen said thoughtfully, curling up on the floor like a cinnamon roll. "He wasn't afraid of me. I don't think he'd even realised I was chasing him until that moment. He was just on a rampage. I think he'd have had a go at me too, except he couldn't. He'd used every ounce of whatever he had in him. All the life drained out of his eyes. Didn't blink, barely breathed." And she also goes on to tell them that the Stealth are now involved. So the Stealth, if you recall, are the internal law enforcement investigation department of the Wondrous Society. And Morrigan thinks, well, the fact that they are involved, this is obviously being taken really seriously. Something weird is definitely going on. Before Fen can disappear to catch up on her 7 scheduled naps that she's missed that day, Morrigan asks her about the eyes. She says, "Did you see the eyes? Did you see anything strange about them?" But much like Hawthorne, Fen has no idea what she's talking about. Chapter 14, Hollowpox. Huzzah! Do any Australians remember the Triple J? There's a radio station called Triple J in Australia, and they had this game that they would play called Huzzah. It's barely I don't even know if it counts as a game. It's very straightforward. The rules are that you have to be the first person when you're watching a movie and the people in the movie say the name of the movie in context. You have to be the first person to say Huzzah! So like if you were watching Wicked, the first time someone says Wicked, you have to yell Huzzah! I think we should start playing that in these books. You can play along at home when you read Silverborn. The first time the word Silverborn is mentioned, yell Huzzah! Okay, it might not work as well with books because it's not really a group activity. Anyway, Huzzah! Chapter 14, Hollowpox. So the next day is when Morrigan sees Jupiter next in the Gathering Place in a C&D meeting that is all about what's been going on. This is where the truth of it comes out. So Elder Quinn has gathered everyone together, and she says, "For some weeks now, we have been quietly investigating a series of incidents in Nevermoor that we believe to be related. We are now certain they are." And she talks about Javella de Flimsey and Brutalist Brown and Victor Aldershaw at the Nevermoor Opera House. And she says, "However, these are not the only incidents we've been investigating. There have in fact been nearly a dozen so far. And that number continues to rise. And they've put together a task force which is being overseen by Elder Saga and led by Jupiter." And Cadence leans over to ask Morrigan, "Did you know he was involved with this?" And Morrigan says, "Not exactly, though if you look very carefully, you'll notice my complete and utter lack of surprise. If there's one thing Jupiter North is not short of, it's jobs." Just another one to the list. So Jupiter gets up to explain what is happening. He shows everyone a map of Nevermoor with a bunch of glowing red dots, a dozen or so, all over the place. And Morrigan notices there is one outside Tenterfield Wonderground Station where Brutalist Brown attacked her, and there is one at the Nevermoor Opera House. Jupiter first of all says, "This is not a case of copycat crimes. The Stealth have investigated and they've completely ruled that out. The attackers have all contracted the same unknown, highly aggressive virus. It causes normal brain function to shut down, resulting in erratic, violent, and, I would like to emphasize, completely involuntary behaviour. As I'm sure many of you have realised by now," he continued gravely, "there is something else the attackers have in common. They are all Wunimals." So essentially what he's describing is, I mean, I wrote this novel because I wanted to write like an Outbreak style novel, but more than anything, it's a zombie type novel, which is kind of what we're describing here with this virus. Jupiter goes on to say, we don't know how it's passed on, but the illness is spreading fast. These are the casualties of the virus so far, at least the ones we know about. The red dots indicate where the infected were when the virus peaked, before apparently exiting the body and leaving the Wundermore in a comatose state. This is what we're calling the point of culmination. This culmination period seems to last several minutes for some Wundermores and up to an hour for others. It's marked by acts of violent, frantic, uncontrollable aggression, sometimes against others, sometimes against public property, and sometimes against themselves. This frenzied culmination and subsequent coma is what makes the illness dangerous not only to the Wundermores it infects, but to everyone else around them. Again, it's a zombie story. And so all of these dozen or so Wundermore victims of the virus have been moved from the Royal Lightwing Wundermore Hospital into the teaching hospital at Wunsock because they want to keep a really close eye on them. They want to keep this under wraps and kind of protect them from outside scrutiny. And Jupiter says, when the disease, or the Hollowpox, we're calling it for want of a better name, when the Hollowpox leaves the body, it seems to take almost everything with it. It wouldn't necessarily be obvious to anyone who isn't like me, who isn't a witness. But they're not just comatose, they're sort of empty. No sense of self, no brain activity, completely unresponsive. We remain hopeful that these effects may be temporary, but right now it's impossible to know for sure. And so everyone is slightly panicked. Everyone blows up with questions. You know, the Wundermores want to know, how can we prevent ourselves getting this? And other people say, could this be passed on to humans? Are we also at risk? How can we stop the attacks? Is there a cure? Do you need volunteers for the task force? And Baz Charlton pipes up, as Baz Charlton often does, right? He says, if this is only affecting Wundermores, why don't we just lock all the Wundermores up together? Dead simple. They can attack each other instead of us. He has this extraordinary ability to make the suggestion with the least empathy. He's just a person who has no empathy. He's done this before where he sticks his hand up and says, what about this? Activate her safeguard, blah, blah, blah. Like, he makes these dumb suggestions that just are completely void of any kind of regard for life. And that's Baz Charlton. Anyway, he's told to pipe down. Jupiter tells everyone who is part of the task force. There's Inspector Rivers, there's himself, there's Dr. Bramble, Dr. Lutwich, and also Holiday Wu, who is managing the public distraction efforts. Once again, Baz Charlton pipes up. Not doing a very good job though, is she? Considering we all read about it in the papers this weekend. And Jupiter opens his mouth to respond, but one thing about Holiday Wu is that she can stand up for herself. And what can you tell me about all the other attacks, Baz? She said coolly, not even bothering to stand up or turn around in her seat. Same as what's in your head. Nothing. That's because I've hushed them up. How about this? I'll do my job and you do yours, whatever it may be. Presumably something that requires you to smell bad and sound stupid. And this is part of why I love Holiday Wu. And the last question comes from Sophia. So everyone's kind of busy laughing at Holiday's shutdown of Baz Charlton. But then Sophia, the fox one, stands up and she says, what about the infected Wundermores, Captain North? The ones you said were hollow. What's going to happen to them? And Morrigan kind of feels bad then for having thought anything about this could possibly be funny. And Jupiter says, we don't know yet, but they're safe and in very capable hands at the teaching hospital. And I promise you, we're working hard to find a cure. Chapter 15, the Gossamer Spun Garden. So the bulk of this chapter takes place on Sub 9 in one of Morrigan's Ghostly Hour lessons in a place called the Gossamer Spun Garden, funnily enough. We will get to that though. But first I just want to quickly talk about the conversation that Morrigan has with Sophia before her lesson. So they're kind of avoiding talking about the touchy subject of the Hollowpox, and Morrigan asks what Sophia's knack is. So here we learn Sophia's knack and Connell's knack. Connell's knack is that he can speak to the dead. He is a clairvoyant, but he doesn't do it anymore. He refuses to do it. And Sophia doesn't necessarily know why. All she knows is that something happened and maybe it was something spooky or something bad, and now he absolutely refuses to do it, hasn't done it for a long time. Sophia's knack is that she can bring dead things back to life. And Morrigan gets quite excited by this. But Sophia's like, whoa, slow down, hit the brakes. It's not as good as it sounds, trust me. It doesn't work on people or Wundermores, or large animals, or small animals for that matter. What does it work on? Sophia's face turned thoughtful. Insects, some rodents, most plants if they're small enough and haven't been dead for very long. Essentially, if you've a bug, rat, or shrub that desperately needs resurrecting, I'm your gal. Now, I want to take you on a brief tangent that is related to this. It's like the tiniest bit spoilery, but it's not a plot twist. It's not a big reveal or anything. It's actually just like expanding the lore a little bit on the nature of arcane and mundane knacks. And this is a conversation that I wrote in an early draft of Silverborn, and I got rid of it really early on before it was seen by anyone, only because I realized that the reason they were having this conversation was not going to be relevant. I was going to take that out of this particular book. There wasn't going to be room for it. It may come up, this conversation, I hope it does, in maybe book 5 or 6. So if you really want to avoid absolutely anything that has even the slightest tiny whiff of a spoiler, maybe just skip forward a minute or two. But it's not really spoilery at all. It's not a big deal. Basically, Sophia is talking to Morrigan about the nature of mundane versus arcane knacks. And she's talking about the fact that the arcane school is so much smaller than the mundane school. And she says that's not just because arcane knacks are rarer, although they are. It's also because they are seen by the elders and by the society in general as being riskier. And not just in terms of like more dangerous, although many of them are quite dangerous, more in terms of like they can be a risky investment for the Wonder Society. And the reason for that is that a mundane knack, so for example, say you are a child violinist and you're a prodigy and you're really super talented, you could join the Wonder Society and then practice every day and develop your skill and develop your talent and become better and better and better and better, and then just be an absolute phenomenon by the time you're an adult. Arcane knacks can sometimes be finite, like much more often than a mundane act. An arcane act can experience little to no growth. For example, that might end up being the case with Lamb's knack. She's a short-range oracle. She doesn't necessarily have the ability to grow that in any way, whether that's having more visions come to her or have more detailed specific visions, or, you know, maybe she will experience some growth, but maybe not. Maybe her knack just is what it is. She might get better at interpreting what she sees. She might get better at like managing her body and brain's response to the experience of having her visions. But it doesn't necessarily mean that her knack is going to become any more useful to the Wonder Society. And so there is this element of risk in investing in children who have these arcane knacks, knowing that, well, we could put a lot of investment into these kids and they may just stay exactly as they are. And this has been the case with Sophia. So when she was an 11-year-old kit, which is a child fox, a kit one, she could resurrect a daisy, for example, and that was super impressive. Oh my goodness, this little kid can resurrect flowers, dead flowers. That's amazing. But she hasn't, she's not now resurrecting sequoias or, you know, rhinoceroses or anything. Like, her knack is what it is. It's finite, and it's not that useful to the Wonder Society except in like vanishingly rare, very specific situations. However, what this has meant for Sophia is that it's given her this gift of being able to kind of go under the radar a bit. She's a Wonder Society member, but she can kind of like lay low, which has meant that she could join the Basement Nerds and dedicate her life to studying the wondrous arts and preserving the history of Wundersmiths. She says in this lost conversation that may appear later, she says to Morrigan, don't feel sorry for me. Like, this is the best possible outcome for me. I'm really happy. So anyway, that is just may be interesting to absolutely no one except me, but there it is. That's just a little expansion on the lore of arcane and mundane knacks. Anyway, so Morrigan goes to have her ghostly hour lesson in the Gossam garden, which is of course one of these big, empty, cold, bare chambers, and she steps through into the ghostly hour and it transforms. She steps back into the past to see what it was once like. It wasn't so much a garden as 1,000 different gardens, or 1,000 different drawings of a garden from 1,000 different imaginations rendered in 3 dimensions by 1,000 different artists. There were trees that grew up to the ceiling, bearing fruit of silver and gold, and rainbow vines that moved like snakes. There was a meadow of wonky sunflowers that grew high above Morrigan's head, and a fairy-sized garden with funny little red toadstools. And the teacher in this lesson is Brilliance Amadeo, and she's taking this little group of young children, young Wundersmiths. And Brilliance tells them the Gossam garden is over 700 years old. Its plants and flowers and animals never die. Its vines and trees never become overgrown or unmanageable. It's entirely handmade, woven from the gossamer threads of the world around us. So this is basically like a canvas. It's a practice room, essentially a practice garden where Wundersmiths have learned mostly the art of weaving. So it's full of kind of wonky, misshapen practice runs of young children's weaving efforts. And Morrigan does this in her lesson. They all weave their own flower, and hers ends up looking like a wonky green pillbox on a stick. And it takes a lot of concentration and a lot of energy. And at the end of this lesson, when it fades away around her, she is just exhausted. Like, it's taken everything out of her, this one act of weaving. And she just kind of sits there for ages, and she loses track of time, and she is starving. And then suddenly Rook Rosenfeld shows up, and she says, "You didn't pace yourself, did you?" And she brings a bowl of chicken soup, which kind of resurrects her a little bit. And in this conversation, Morrigan asks Rook what feels like a slightly nosy question. She says, "Where did the others go?" And what she means is, when you're out, when you're here talking to me, where's Dearborn? Where's Murgatroyd? And Rook's kind of like, well, they're all in there. They're rattling around somewhere. And Morrigan asks, how many of you are in there? And Rook kind of confesses that she doesn't know. And the analogy that she uses is, have you ever seen a set of nesting dolls? You open up one and there's another inside her and another inside her and another. Could one of those dolls know how many she carried within her? Could she know how deeply they'd nested inside her brain? Which is so creepy. It's such a creepy idea of having dolls nesting in your brain. And she says, I don't know, I can feel them rattling around in there. Maybe we go on forever. And that afternoon on the train ride home, all that Unit 919 wants to talk about is the Hollowpox. But by this time, Morrigan has almost kind of forgotten about the Hollowpox, because she has just had a life-changing lesson. She has just learned to weave. And it was a silly, wonky little flower that she made, but it was her wonky flower, and she is so proud of it. And when Lamb asks her, what did you do today, Morrigan? And she says, I made a flower. And Lamb says, that's nice, because it sounds like she's had some kind of like craft lesson. I glued some things on a piece of paper and made a flower. But what it actually was kind of the most life-changing day she's ever had. Or one of them. She's had a few life-changing days, to be fair. Chapter 16, Extracurricular Activity. There are quite a few things that happen in this chapter, so I'm going to try and whiz through them as efficiently as possible, while also giving you, obviously, the relevant information that you need. First of all, warning signs begin showing up all around Woodstock in the form of public service announcement posters, and they say, Hollowpox, are you at risk? What is the Hollowpox? A potentially deadly disease caused by a virus which spreads quickly from one animal to one animal. Could you be infected? If you are a Wundermore and are experiencing extreme distraction or forgetfulness, dramatically increased appetite, an inability to sleep or sit still, or episodes of aggression that seem out of character, you may be infected. If you have experienced any of the above symptoms, see Dr. Bramble, Dr. Lutwich, or a member of staff at the Wondrous Society Teaching Hospital immediately. Be mindful, don't delay, ask for help. And Morrigan notes that the piece of key information that is missing, which she did tell Jupiter about, is the green eyes, and she's wondering why that was left out. Presumably this is Jupiter's work, since he is the leader of the Hollowpox task force. Anyway, the other thing that's happening is that the class called What's That Smell? The class about distraction and causing minor mayhem, has been a raging success. All of Unit 919 has passed with flying colours, and they've moved on to the sequel class, which is called What's That on Your Face? And they're all really good at it, and they're really enjoying it, but Morrigan cannot help but think it is a bit of a waste of time. And this is where we see the beginning of her kind of growing obsession. Obsession feels like an unkind word, but we'll say obsession with her ghostly hours and her lessons on Sub 9. And I say it's unkind because, like, to be fair, if someone gave you a time machine and said, here you go, and essentially that's what ghostly hours are, you can go back in time to all of these different points in history and learn how to use your magical powers from all of these legendary teachers. I'd be obsessed. You would be obsessed. But, she's got these sensible voices around her. Miss Cheery reminds her that mundane and arcane skills are still useful and it's important to be an all-rounder. And Rook tells her it's a marathon and not a sprint. And Sophia tells her to go gently and to pace herself and to use caution. But Morrigan just is dying to learn the skills that have been held away from her, that have been kept away from her for so long. And all she can hear is the voice of Ezra Squall in her head saying, you are not a mouse, Morrigan Crow, you are a dragon. So, Morrigan talks to Jupiter about these mysterious posters that have showed up, and he says, listen, I'm not responsible for those. There's not enough exclamation marks, and they're black and white. It's just not my style. He says, that was Dr. Bramble's idea, and between you and me, I'm not sure it was a good one. That list of symptoms is more like a list of guesses we've cobbled together from questioning family and friends of the infected. They were all pretty vague and contradictory. Nobody seemed certain of much at all. I'm not convinced there are any proper symptoms before culmination. Basically, nobody knows anything, but in order to feel some sense of we're taking action, we're doing something, there is some, it's kind of giving people in one sock a false sense of safety of there's a framework around this. Here are the symptoms. This is what you've got to look out for. But Jupiter is admitting to Morrigan, we don't know what you've got to look out for. Everyone is saying something different. This is kind of nonsense. And she does ask him about the whole green eyes thing, and he admits that it was a deliberate omission. He says, we're worried it might send the wrong message, basically, to talk about the Wundermals having glowing green eyes. People are already frightened, he said. They're already poised to view the infected as attackers rather than victims of an illness they can't control. If we describe them as having glowing green eyes, you can be sure some numpty will claim they've been possessed by demons or some such nonsense. Who cares what some numpty thinks? The thing about numpties, Mog, is that they can always find plenty of other numpties to believe their numpty nonsense. You know what they say, you're never more than 6 feet away from a numpty. I think that's spiders. It's true, you are never more than 6 feet away from a numpty, and sometimes they can take you by surprise. That's kind of just the truth. There are a lot of numpties in the world, and they're very good at finding each other. Sorry. Gotta be honest. They talk a little bit about the name of why they called it the Hollowpox, and Morrigan asks what he sees when he looks at the people who are infected with the Hollowpox. And essentially, like, the subtext here is that they've called it the Hollowpox based entirely on Jupiter's kind of perception of these Wundermals that are infected. Because when he talks about them being hollow, it's not the fact that they're in a comatose state. It is the lack of what he would normally see as a witness that makes them quote-unquote hollow. He says, when I look at someone, really look at them, I see a whole, complete, unique person. I spoke to Dame Chanda this afternoon, for example, and she had a song stuck in her head. It fluttered around her ears like a moth. She was cross about something. It cast a little black shadow over her face. Beyond the surface, she was cloaked in a deep, melancholy blue, like she was under the ocean. That's the sadness she feels for her friend Javella, I think. Beyond that, she has this constant, steady kindness right here around the sternum, like a candle burning in a windowless room. Some people only ever have flashes of kindness, but hers is a permanent fixture. He stared into the middle distance for a moment. Beyond that, well, I don't often look beyond that. The deeper layers are harder to unravel. People lock them down, hold them as close as possible, even if they don't realise it. That's a boundary I won't cross unless invited. But those Wundermals in the teaching hospital, there's nothing there, he said softly. Nothing on the surface, nothing underneath, no past, no present. And he goes on to say, they're not asleep, they're not anything. Someone in a coma still has all the things that make them a person. They still have dreams and physical afflictions and the imprints other people have left on them, scars and smudges from loved ones and enemies. They still have a past. But these Wundermals, they're like black holes. There's nothing there. So it's not just that they are asleep. It's the fact that their past, their imprints from other people, everything, all of the experiences that would gather to them, that would be visible to Jupiter, have gone. They've been taken away. And so the name Hollowpox has essentially come from how Jupiter perceives them. In the weeks that follow, all of their C&D gatherings basically turn into Hollowpox task force meetings. The locked ward in the teaching hospital is filled up because there are more and more attacks every single day, and the hospital is becoming extremely short-staffed, and senior scholars and even some junior scholars like Anar have been drafted in to help, which is handy for Unit 919 in a way because it means that Anar can give them some kind of insider information. Now, the other thing that is happening here, of course, is going back to Morrigan's obsession with the ghostly hours, is that she realizes that, okay, Rook is setting up her timetable. She's and Sophia and Connell, they're giving her a list of lessons that she is supposed to go to, but there's nothing stopping her from going to extra lessons because she just can't get enough at this point. And she attends one lesson in the wondrous art of ruination with Griselda Polaris. And it's fantastic. She loves it. It's one of the best lessons that she's had. Ruination was the opposite of weaving, and unexpectedly, it seemed to take nearly as much precision and care to properly ruin something as it did to weave it in the first place. And so she watches this phenomenal lesson where Griselda creates a kind of glass house, a glass conservatory from scratch. She weaves it and then she slowly disassembles it piece by piece, painstakingly, until it is nothing but a pile of fine white sand. It has gone from glass to sand. And Morrigan is so elated by all of this that she almost misses the punchline, the clanger, the big slap in the face at the end of this lesson. She hears one of the students asking Griselda something, and then Griselda turns around to this boy and says, "Excellent question, Mr. Squall." Dun dun dun, dun dun dun, dun dun dun. Chapter 17, Ezra the Boy. So Morrigan feels like a bit of an idiot because of course Ezra Squall must be scattered across these ghostly hours. Of course he was a Wundersmith who had to learn the wondrous arts just like her. And she decides to go on what she calls a squall hunt. So his name isn't listed anywhere in the Book of Ghostly Hours, but she starts to notice the names that she should be looking for, the names of Wundersmiths from his generation. And so if she finds a ghostly hour with Elodie Bower or Owain Binks or Brilliant Summer Deo or Decima Kokoro or Griselda Polaris, then there's always a chance that she might see him in one of those ghostly hours. And she does. There he is, hidden in plain sight. She sees him in a water weaving lesson and he's 17 years old and boisterous and carefree, and she sees him around her own age in a lesson in the Whinging Woods, giggling with Elodie Bower and making fun of Owain Binks. And she sees him in a one-on-one lesson with Brilliant Amadeo where he's learning the wondrous art of veil, and she sees the way that he kind of blushes and is so delighted when Brilliance praises the good work that he's doing. And she just finds this so confusing because how can she reconcile this boy at all these different ages who is just nothing like the man that she has met? How had this mild, happy, studious boy grown up into such a monster? Morrigan was certain that one day, if she watched him closely enough, his mask would slip. She'd see the shadow of the man he would become. He was in there somewhere. And yet, she'd already begun to think of them as two different people, Ezra the boy and Squall the monster. And Sophia shows up and finds her in one of these ghostly hours, and Morrigan admits, "I've been looking for Ezra Squall," and she thinks that she is going to get in trouble for this, but Sophia says, "Hey, we're all just guests here. Like, this school belongs to you. You have more right than any of us to be stumbling around in these ghostly hours. We just want you to kind of be careful and pace yourself." And she tells Morrigan that this book being Onstold's life work, he wanted to protect it from scrutiny, and that is why he left out the name Ezra Squall, because as she says, everything Squall's name touches turns to ashes. He just didn't want the elders basically confiscating it or destroying it. And Sophia also says, you're braver than I am, because I try to avoid the ghostly hours where Squall shows up. I can't bear to be in the same room as him. It's scary, but it's also just heartbreaking thinking about how it all turned out and seeing him with these people who were his friends, knowing how it would all end. And Morrigan's like, how did it all end? And Sophia talks about the Courage Square Massacre. She says, you do know about the Courage Square Massacre. And Morrigan says, yeah, I know about the Courage Square Massacre, of course. That was, Squall was building an army to take over Nevermoor, and then one day in Courage Square, a group of people stood up to him and he killed them all, and this is when it clicks for her. She's always just thought of these as kind of nameless, faceless people who just were brave and stood up to this Wundersmith, but it was his friends, of course. Who would stand up to a Wundersmith except another Wundersmith? It was Elodie and Owain and Brilliance. It was all of these people that he knew. It was his friends who were really more like his family that he murdered. And she, again, kind of can't believe that hasn't clicked for her before now. And Morrigan asks a really valid question. She says, if they tried to stop him, if those brave people everyone talks about were Wundersmiths themselves, Why does everyone hate Wundersmith so much? Why do they act like Ezra School was the only one just because he was the worst one? And Sophia explains after what happened in Courage Square, when there were no more Wundersmiths to protect people against Squall and his monstrous army, there was a brief, very dark period when it seemed he had won, that he'd conquered Nevermoor. And in that time, Wundersmith became synonymous with Ezra Squall, who had himself become synonymous with evil. A Wundersmith became a monstrous thing, something to be feared instead of loved and admired. When the ancient magic of the city rose up to protect its people and exiled Squall for good, the Wonder Society was the first place people went to for answers and retribution and revenge, the place that had raised him up in the first place and put him on a pedestal. If the Wonder Society wanted to survive as an institution in a city that had come to hate the idea of the Wundersmith, then they had to hate it even more. They had to hate it the most. And so she explains that One Sock basically decided to give itself this makeover. It threw these brave, selfless people under the bus, essentially. It erased their names from the history of the Courage Square massacre. It erased their contributions and the contributions of Wundersmith throughout history in order to selfishly survive as an organization. And that was a bunch of individual people coming together, making the decision to do that, to prop up and save an institution. And Sophia kind of apologizes and said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to kind of put this all on you. I thought you knew. I thought you understood the history of the Courage Square massacre. And Morrigan nearly laughs at that, except that none of it was funny. How could she possibly know? The ghostly hours were perfectly fine tools for learning the wondrous arts, but they taught her precisely nothing about who these people were. And Morrigan just wonders, like, what were these people thinking? What was the High Council of Elders thinking? How did they possibly justify to themselves their decision to vilify 8 innocent people and erase Wundersmith history? Chapter 18, Daylight Robbery. So it's summer of 3. We are moving very swiftly towards the end of the semester, and Morrigan is now spending more time in the past than the present. She is really getting to know all of her predecessors, all of these Wundersmiths from the past. And they're almost starting to feel like people she knows. They're almost starting to feel like friends. Even, weirdly, Ezra Squall, which she feels very conflicted and guilty about. Ezra was just so normal. Every time he teased Owain or Elodie, or called the venerable Griselda Polaris ma'am, or laughed at one of his own jokes, or made a mistake in class and got frustrated with himself, it just made him seem more normal, more human. He could have been anyone in her unit. He could have been her. And she tells Hawthorne and Cadence about all of this, and she ends up kind of having to slightly downplay it because, of course, both of them, but particularly Hawthorne, get pretty freaked out at the idea that she is down there spending time with the evilest man who ever lived. And she kind of has to say, look, it's not the real Squall, it's just an historical record. And Hawthorne says, oh, like watching a film. Morrigan wanted to tell him how very unlike watching a film it had been that morning when she'd seen 7-year-old Ezra cry because he couldn't breathe fire as well as Owain. He was so upset she'd almost wanted to reach out and hug him. Yeah, she said instead, something like that. Meanwhile, the Hollowpox is kind of infecting every part of their lives. Everyone knows someone who has been affected in some way. A neighbour who was infected with the virus, someone else who was attacked by a Wundermore. And so things are really ramping up and getting quite serious. And in their latest workshop, they go out into the city for their 3rd workshop in minor distractions. It is called What's That Behind You? And they have this task. They're split into groups of 3. Morrigan is with Thadia and Francis, and their 3 instructions are as follows. 1, cause a distraction. 2, steal something. 3, don't get caught. So Morrigan, Francis, Thadia end up in a secondhand shop, in a big thrift shop called Secondhand City. Sneaky little Gavin and Stacey reference. I always stick them in where I can, apparently. They are trying to find something to steal, and they come across this enormous, it looks like a rail pod, and the owner of the shop is talking to another customer about it, and he seems to think that it is a rail pod from the Wintersea Republic because it has like Wintersea Republic insignia, and so he says it's really valuable. But as they sneak up to take a closer look at it, it smells like dirty river water or dirty seawater and seaweed. And Francis says, this is not a rail pod, this is a submarine. I recognize it because his great aunt, Iowa Akinfenwa, was a famous admiral in the Sea Force, and she has all these books on like seafaring vessels. And he says, I think that this is for spies. Like, look at all of the technology. There's periscopes and there's sonar equipment and blah, blah, blah. And Thadia gets it in her head that, okay, this is what we're stealing. This is what we're, go big or go home, as she says. And Morrigan says, great, I vote go home. Because Morrigan's like, we can't steal this enormous thing. We are 3 people and we're never going to get this back to school in time. I have a lesson that I have to get to on sub 9. And this kind of makes Thadia kick off because she's sick of hearing about sub 9. She's like, can you please shut up about your dead mates? Horrible. I don't think she exactly says that. I'm paraphrasing. She's just sick of hearing it. She's sick of hearing about whiny Binky, as she refers to Owain Binks, and all of these people that, Morrigan's getting to meet on her precious sub 9. And, they're all trying to get better at what they're actually there to do. They're all in this minor distraction class trying to kind of improve their skills so that they can be useful to the society in its mission of containment and distraction. And what's Morrigan doing? She's just constantly obsessing about whatever's happening down on sub 9. And so they have this argument. It's interrupted by Hawthorne, who comes and says, hey, come outside. Stuff is kicking off on the street. And this is where we meet Laurent St. James and his megaphone for the first time. Ugh. Cadence says, listen to this fool. The fool in question was a smartly dressed man standing on a crate and shouting into a megaphone at the assembled audience. It was an angry, booming, unpleasant sound, and the things he was saying were even more unpleasant. This is simply a matter of nature righting itself. These so-called Wunimals are unnatural. They are an affront to humanity. They were never meant to walk among humans as our equals. Morrigan and Unit 919 are all deeply unimpressed by this. This was inevitable, he bellowed. We have strayed too far from the natural order with our tolerance of these abominations, and now the true nature of the beast is exposing itself. We must protect ourselves and our families, and we must have the right to do so, but those in power would deny us that right. And he goes on to talk about the Wonder Society hiding all of these victims of he wouldn't refer to them as victims, but they are hiding these known Wunimal attackers, as he refers to them, which is, of course, true. That's exactly what the Wonder Society is doing, and Morrigan wonders if there is a leak at Onesock. And in her words, all it would take was someone with a big mouth, and the Society didn't exactly have a shortage of those. Lamb makes them all leave. Lamb, the short-range oracle, has seen something, and she grabs Morrigan and grabs all of them and says, let's go. Of course they know by now not to argue with Lamb, the oracle, and they leave just as the whole thing turns into a street brawl. Back at Onesock, Miss Cheery informs Unit 919 that they're all getting a day off tomorrow because tomorrow's lessons are cancelled. The elders have called a senior summit and announced that junior scholars get the last day of term off as a treat to do something fun with their units. And they all shout out suggestions of what the something fun would be. Thadia thinks it's Destiny because there's a fight on at the Trolloceum tomorrow between Grimsgorgonblag the Mighty and Fladnak the Fit. One of my great joys in life is coming up with stupid names for trolls. I don't think I got to do it in Silverborn, but I'm looking forward to doing it in the next one. You just string a bunch of consonants together and throw in the odd vowel and make it sound as silly as possible. Hawthorne wants to go to the pool. Mahir suggests the Goblin library. No one is on board with this except Miss Cheery, who says that an old girlfriend of hers works at the Gob, as she calls it, and she gets quite excited about this idea, about seeing her friend Roshni. No one's on board with going to the Gob until Mahir says there's a whole private section dedicated to the history of Onesock, members only. And Morrigan's ears perk up because she thinks if there's a section about the history of Onesock, surely that includes the history of Wundersmiths. And she sees an opportunity and she says, I vote we go to the Gob. Not at all endearing herself to Thadia, who was already annoyed with her. Chapter 19, the Goblin Library. So, despite Hawthorne and Thadia's best efforts in dragging their feet all the way there, they do indeed end up at the Gob the next day. They enter through a revolving door on Mayhew Street in Old Town, and they emerge once again on Mayhew Street. The Mayhew Street they just left seconds earlier had been bright and sunny and swelteringly hot, full of people enjoying the summer day. This Mayhew Street was as cool and crisp as an autumn evening, twilight dim and empty of life. There was no traffic, no sound at all. So this is the Goblin library. It is a pocket realm, Miss Cherry explains to them eventually. It is a pocket realm that kind of just like popped into existence several ages ago. It is always dusk. It is always cool. It is never raining. Perfect conditions, really, for housing about a gajillion books in the streets of this pocket realm of Nevermoor, which is exactly what they do. The city is filled with gigantic rows of bookshelves that are all filled with every book that's ever been published. And each neighborhood, each precinct, each borough is a different genre or category of book. And Roshni Singh, Miss Cherry's friend, old girlfriend, we're not totally sure, but it's pretty clear that Miss Cherry is kind of flirting with her. Miss Roshni Singh is a librarian. She's just been promoted from bookfighter to librarian. She wears a cardigan now. She wears spectacles. Things are serious now that she's a librarian. So she's reluctant to let them in because she wasn't expecting her friend Marina to bring a bunch of kids who don't have their own library cards, but eventually she does give in, not before giving them a very stern lecture about the dangers of being in the library. I cannot stress this enough. It is extremely dangerous in here. You must be vigilant at all times. You must stay with the group at all times. You must pay attention and listen to my instructions and the instructions of my bookfighters. If we tell you to run, you run. If we tell you to drop to the ground, you drop to the ground. If we tell you not to pat the bunny in the waistcoat, then trust me, you do not want to pat the bunny in the waistcoat. She paused, looking around at them impressively, her eyes owlishly large behind the thick glass of her specs. Because he has rabies. Miss Cherry cleared her throat. Rosh, she said quietly. Okay, fine, he doesn't have rabies, Roshni admitted. But he could have rabies, or he could have a truncheon. You wouldn't know, so do as I say, understand? Originally, in my first draft, instead of saying he could have a truncheon, I said he could have a shiv. And understandably, that didn't pass the filter of the editorial process. I was not allowed to suggest that a bunny in a waistcoat may be carrying a shiv. And listen, I get it, it's understandable. So he may be carrying a truncheon. Not sure if I should be telling that, but anyway. So, a couple of things here. One is that Roshni very casually drops the information that sometimes the inhabitants of the books get out, and that it is the job of bookfighters to round up the rogues and herd them back to where they're supposed to be, inside the books, presumably. And the other thing is that Morrigan overhears a little conversation between Roshni and one of the bookfighters or another librarian on her radio. She hears a crackling sound, and this voice says, "Mate, we've had a situation here in Lilithgate. That infestation from last week came back. We've driven them off, but I'm afraid now it looks like they're headed south. They might be coming your way, just a heads up." And Roshni assures Morrigan that even though she used the word infestation, which is a word nobody ever wants to hear, it doesn't often mean something good, she says, no, don't worry, it's fine. So Morrigan is off trying to find the Wondrous Society history section, because the other bit of information that Roshni has dropped is that there are private collections for the mundane arts and for the arcane arts. And so Morrigan thinks, well, by logical extension, there must be a private wondrous art section. And eventually she finds it. It is down a tricksy lane, of course, because if you wanted to hide something, you would hide it down a tricksy lane. It is in fact down one that she recognizes. She has to go through Devilish Court once again, through the trick that takes all of the oxygen out of her lungs, and she pushes through, and she sees once again the courtyard where the ghastly market was held. Seconds later, she emerged gasping for breath and found herself in the square where she and Cadence had seen the ghastly market last summer. But instead of a bustling market filled with contraband horrors and nefarious customers, here in the pocket realm there were simply more shelves of old books. It felt almost cozy, a little wilder, a little more overgrown than the rest of the library, with more trees shading the books and more vines strangling the shelves. Perhaps, if this was the Wondrous Arts collection, it was only accessible to Wundersmiths. It may have been over 100 years since anyone had stood on this spot. What a thought. And she sees a word on the spine of one of these books that she recognizes. She sees the word Singularities. And when she goes to inspect it, the book is called Curiosities, Marvels, Spectacles, Singularities and Phenomena, Volume 1 of an Unabridged History of the Wondrous Act Spectrum by Lillian Pugh. Now, if you recall, Onstold's book, the abridged history of the Wondrous Act Spectrum, was called Missteps, Blunders, Fiascos, Monstrosities and Devastations. This is a whole different thing. She's getting the real history now, the one that Onstold and the Wondrous Society have been trying to cover up. And she notices that this is volume 1 2, 3, 4, 5. The shelves stretch on all the way to volume 307. All of them are by a bunch of different authors as well. That will become relevant down the track. It's not right now, but none of them are Wundersmiths. That's all I will say about that. Volume 307 by Sudbury Smithereens features names that she is very familiar with: Griselda Polaris, Rasta Ben Tarazad, Decima Kokori, etc., Ezra Squall, Elodie Bauer. So this is the book that is about the generation of Squall's fellow Wundersmiths. And Morrigan decides to steal the book. She doesn't know when she'll be able to get back here. She doesn't have a library card. What else can she do? She's going to steal this book because she wants to know what's in it. Unfortunately, she is almost foiled when she walks out of this section and finds Cadence waiting for her. And Cadence is like, "What you doing? Stealing a book?" More or less. And this is where we see the moral line in the sand that Cadence has surrounding books in the library. There are some boundaries here for her. And when Roshni shows up and sees that Morrigan is stealing a book, that she has shoved a gigantic book under her cloak, Cadence almost refuses to help her. But in the end, she comes through and she uses her "this is not the book you're looking for" mesmerism skills to say to Roshni, no, she's not trying to steal a book. She's just being perfectly charming, and you love all of Marina's scholars and you can't wait for us to visit again. Everything's fine. And then we have one of my favourite lines in the book when Morrigan says, "Seriously, thank you, I owe you one." And Cadence says, "You owe me more than one, you filthy book stealer. Don't worry, I'm keeping a tally." So they meet up with the rest of Unit 919 and Morrigan is just about to get away with it. They're going to leave the library. She has her book, but then a klaxon sounds. There is a siren. The lanterns hanging off the shelves changed from murky green to a fiery, glowing red. Everyone stopped talking. And she thinks, oh great, okay, I've been caught. They know I have it. They're coming to arrest me. But instead, they hear another sound. A strange, high-pitched, whining metallic sound, a bit like a buzzsaw, then a noise like two pieces of sandpaper being rubbed together. And Roshni says, everyone get to the coach right now. They run, or they try to run for the coach, but they don't make it because they are cut off and surrounded. Before they made it even halfway there, Morrigan's whole unit, Roshni and Miss Cheery, all pulled up abruptly, their escape thwarted by a sight that made the skin all over Morrigan's body crawl as if she'd instantly broken out in hives. They were surrounded. The infestation had arrived. Okay, I will put a small PSA at the beginning of this video, just as a heads up so that you know. So you should already know this, but I am just going to let you know that I have had a bit of a time crunch situation with filming this week's chapters, and so I'm going to have to break with tradition slightly and leave you hanging on the second half or the second video of this week's recap. It will come next week, I promise, and I'm slightly stitching myself up for all the chapters that I have to film for next week, but it's just been a bit of a week, and I just want to get this out to you, and I know that the next few days are pretty full on as well. So next week you can expect either like 2 slightly longer videos, or possibly I'll just do like the second half of this week and then the videos for next week as well. So the last week will be a bumper week. But what I do have for you still is the giveaway for Hollowpox. And what I have decided to give you is a finished copy of Silverborn. This is the Australian paperback copy. It has the beautiful artwork by Jim Madsen, and I will sign it and personalize it to you. And I wanted to throw some extra swag in. When I did the little informal kind of polling situation on my Instagram a couple of weeks ago, just saying like, what kind of things do you want in a giveaway? A W pin was a really, really popular option. I looked through all of my book swag that I have, and I was sure I had a W pin somewhere, but I can't seem to find one. They were very in demand, and I probably have given a bunch of them away. But what I do have is something that is even less common. So I had these made myself. I had them designed by my friend Kate, and I actually had them created for way back in 2017, beginning of 2018, when I went to Bologna Children's Book Fair, and there was my agency threw like a party for all of the foreign publishers, and I had these made as little like souvenir gifts for them. And this is a little umbrella pin that says Step Boldly, and this is a little crow pin that says Team Mog. And I only have a few of these left, and these two, along with this signed and personalized book, could be yours in the giveaway. It's the usual thing. Just follow me on Instagram, subscribe to this channel, and then comment on this video, whatever you want to comment. I am a little, you can probably tell that in the ramp up to going on tour and in kind of arranging all of my life admin to be able to go on tour, time is slightly getting away from me a little bit. And so I know that I'm a bit behind on replying to a lot of your comments, but I am reading them all and I love them. I'm also tucking away some of your questions because there are some really, really good questions in the comments, and I want to answer them kind of more in depth, some of these. So I'm making a note of them, and I may be using those, or some of those questions anyway, in the live Q&A that I'll be doing, which I will announce those details shortly. And obviously I'll be taking questions during the event itself. Yeah, sorry, this is slightly scattered as at the end of a video, but yeah, here is your giveaway. Enter below in the comments, and I'll see you next week with a bumper week of chapter recaps. Bye. Wait, sorry, before I go, I almost forgot. It probably goes without saying, but we are reading through to the end of Hollowpox. So if you're up to date with the reading of the chapters, you should be complete to chapter 25. And then we're just going all the way through to the end of chapter 38. So we're finishing up Hollowpox just in time for Silverborn to arrive next week. Okay, bye again. Have a good week. Happy reading.